بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وآله الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل Muhammad. Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another week of our weekly talk show. As we close off the month of Dhul Hijjah, this week our topic is surrounding the event of the Mubahala and trying to clear some misconceptions around some of the things that took place at that time. Our esteemed guest this week is Sayyid Mustafa Almodarresi. The Sayyid completed his seminary studies at the holy city of Qom and currently teaches in the John Damaran online seminary and has been spreading the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt on the Manabir of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi for a number of years. Sayyid, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you for joining us on the program. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me.
And Sayyid, just before we get to our program and before the questions we have tonight, we'll just thought we'd check in on you and how you're coping under the current restrictions. I understand maybe it's easier for you in terms of being able to stay at home and study, but I guess not being able to travel, not being able to go to the holy cities of Qom and Karbala, I guess those things are difficult, right?
Alhamdulillah, I'm coping very well. The only concern that we have is about the majalis in Muharram. Otherwise, this lockdown has, the silver linings of the lockdown is you get to spend more time doing research and reading and self-improvement, I guess.
And just also letting our viewers know that if we do have questions tonight regarding the topic, feel free to put it on the Facebook channel or the YouTube channel and we'll try to get to it tonight. So we'll get right into it if you don't mind. So we'll focus on, first of all, what is the event of Mubahala? What happened, what's its significance, and why do we remember it year after year?
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير خلقه أجمعين محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. The incident of Mubahala is perhaps one of the most important events in Islamic history with huge implications, although it remains untapped by the majority of Muslims and non-Muslims. So very briefly, 1 year before the Prophet's departure from this world, he writes a letter to the Christians of Najran. Najran back then was the epicenter of the Christian seminary in the Arabian Peninsula and the Christian presence in the region. So he writes them a letter inviting them to embrace Islam. When they receive the letter, they are frightened. Why? Because the Prophet by then had dominated in the region. He had defeated Quraysh and he was the dominating force. And the invitation that the Prophet sent to the Christians wasn't an invitation sent by a king asking a faction to yield and surrender to his reign. It was a different kind of invitation. It was a religious invitation. So they spent a whole week studying the letter and discussing how to respond to the Prophet. So initially, they discussed it internally, the priests and the seniors of the Christians, and then they broadened the discussion to include all the Christians in the city. Their initial response was, because they lived in a volatile region, they said that we can fight the Muslims. We can wage a war. We have 70,000 soldiers. We have the manpower. And we can fight and try to defeat them. The chief bishop of Najran was a man called Abdul Masih. He was a wise man. He said that we shouldn't resort to military confrontation with the Muslims for many reasons. One of the reasons is because this wasn't the first interaction between the Muslims and the Christians. The first interaction that happened was between the Muslims and the Romans. The Romans were galvanizing a gigantic army composed of 100,000 soldiers. And this is a big number. If you want to put things into perspective, you take a look at the Battle of Badr. It was like 75 people against 100 people. Muslims had only 2 horses. The Battle of Uhud, again, 200 against 200 people. All the casualties of all the wars of Rasulullah was less than 2,000 people. So imagine 100,000 soldiers would participate in this war. But the Prophet preemptively sent Ja'far, son of Abu Talib, the brother of Imam Ali alayhi salam, to go to Mu'tah. Mu'tah was part of their dominion, part of their kingdom. They saw the courage of the Muslims there, even though the Muslims were only 3,000 against 100,000. The Muslims retreated, but this resulted in them backing away from what they intended to do, and the war didn't happen. So first of all, military confrontation with the Muslims is risky. And secondly, he said that what this prophet is preaching is not alien to what we know about Christianity, except the only contentious issue is about Jesus. So he said that the best thing to do is to send a delegation to see what the nature of this invitation is, what he is preaching, to know more about Islam. And then we can, investigate further and then decide. So they agreed, and they sent the cream of the crop of the Christians back then, about 60 people. They traveled about 1,200 kilometers from Najran, which is located on the border between Saudi Arabia today and Yemen. It took them about 14 days, 15 days. They went to the holy city of Medina, and before entering the city, they changed their clothes. They wore the official Christian attire, similar to what we see worn by priests and bishops in the Vatican. So this attracted the attention of the Muslims when they entered inside the holy city of Medina. They went to the Mosque of the Prophet, which wasn't just a place of worship. It was like the Parliament House and where the Prophet governed from. They go there. The Prophet, it was during Salat time, so they sought permission to pray. The Prophet gave them permission. The Prophet was facing Mecca, which is to the south of the holy city of Medina. They faced Jerusalem, which was to the east. When the Prophet finished his prayer, they expected the Prophet to engage with them, to interact with them, but the Prophet minded his own business. So they realized that Imam Ali is the closest man to the Prophet. So they approached because they didn't know what the protocols were. They know how to deal with kings and czars, but this is a special case. So they go to Imam Ali. He's not talking to us. Is he ignoring us? Imam Ali said, it's because of your attire. What matters is your logic. You see our Prophet, he's wearing modest clothes. You can't differentiate between him and his companions. It's not your wealth, it's not the car that you drive, it's not what you carry. It's your logic that matters. You wear like everyone else and then come back.
So could they identify Rasulullah immediately when they came in?
Maybe they asked, but maybe because the Prophet was leading the Salat. But from the dress of the Prophet, you couldn't identify the Prophet. The Prophet didn't have a throne, he didn't have a crown. There was nothing to distinguish the Prophet from normal people. So even though he's the master of God's creation. So eventually they went and they changed their clothes again. They came back to the mosque. The Prophet came and the official meeting commenced. So the Prophet debated them. The debate was focused on the main issues. It was about Tawheed. It was about the oneness of God. And it boiled down to the disagreement that we have with the Christians about Jesus alayhi salam. So their argument was that if you claim that Jesus is like every other prophet that God sent, why was his birth was different? He doesn't have a father. That makes him an extraordinary being. This is why we say that he has a divine element in him. This is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed during the debate, revealed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, إِنَّ مَثَلَ عِيسَى عِنْدَ اللَّهِ كَمَثَلِ آدَمَ. Jesus is like Adam alayhi salam. God created him from clay, and Adam didn't have a father. nor did he have a mother. So if that's your, you base your argument on him not being conceived by a, he doesn't have a father, Adam didn't have a mother as well. So, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed these verses, and the Prophet conveyed these verses to them, but they weren't convinced. They weren't persuaded. So this is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders the Prophet to tell them to engage in Mubahala, to invoke God's wrath to see who's truthful and who is lying. Why is this so important? Because as he was debating, he was receiving revelation. Now the same source of revelation is saying, okay, let's do Mubahala. Let's see God is on whose side. So they agreed straight away. They agreed because they thought that if Jesus is God, then Jesus didn't send Muhammad. Muhammad is not his prophet. So they were confident that the prophet is not a true prophet. This is what they claimed, even though Abdul Masih and other the seniors, the chief bishop, he told them in secret, in close circles, he said that I believe that he is a true prophet. Anyway, so they agreed, but they had to agree. They had to agree because otherwise this would show that they're
show weakness.
Yeah,
show that they
exactly.
weren't confident in their faith.
Exactly, and plus they thought that the Mubahala will either not happen or that because of the Prophet, the Prophet will fail. So the Prophet said, okay, let's come tomorrow morning after sunrise. In accordance to the verse, we bring our children, you bring your children, we'll bring our woman, you bring your woman, and we'll bring ourselves, we'll invite ourselves and you invite yourselves, and we come together and do the Mubahala. So they come. When they come, they're waiting there, waiting for the Prophet to come, and all the Muslims, they come to see what will happen. So it was a spectacle. Suddenly the Prophet leaves his house, accompanying his family members. He comes while he was carrying Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, and he was holding the hands of Imam al-Hassan, and Fatima al-Zahra was behind him, and Imam Ali was behind them. So the chief bishop had said that let's see how the Prophet comes. If he comes with his companions in a display of force, this means that he's not a true prophet. But if he comes with his family members, that means that he's risking that if something happens, and if he's not confident about the Mubahala, something happens to them, these are his loved ones. So, first of all, he came out with his closest family members. And secondly, when he looked at the faces, he said that, Inni ara wujuhan, I can see faces. If they, because the Prophet said, I'll make the prayer and you say Ameen. If they make that prayer and they ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to demolish a mountain, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will demolish a mountain. You can see it in their faces. So then the hadith says that the Prophet fell to his knees and he raised his hands. The mood changed. All of a sudden they could see the celestial signs of adhab, of the wrath of God. So suddenly one of them, Abu al-Harith, his name was Al-Harith or Abu al-Harith, he was with his children, so he carried them and he wanted to leave. So his colleague says to him that, what's happening? He said, no, I'm backing away. So they said to the Prophet, we don't want to engage in Mubahala. Instead, we want to pay jizya. And they were the ones that made that suggestion. So they went and they agreed on paying a jizya with Imam Ali alayhi salam. As for the significance of this event, first of all, it proves the oneness of God. Secondly, it proved the authenticity of the Prophet's prophethood. And thirdly, through the Prophet coming out with his family, he identified his next of kin and his loved ones and his family members. So if there is any obscurity, if there is any ambiguity with respect to ayat al-tathir, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about the progeny of the Prophet, he identifies their names and who he means in ayat al-tathir. And thirdly, this shows that the family of the Prophet are not just his loved ones, because the Prophet said, هؤلاء خاصتي وحامتي لحمهم من لحمي. Their flesh is from my flesh, their blood is from my flesh. إنهم مني أنا منهم. They are from me and I am from them. They are part of God's project. Just like Prophet Ibrahim and Prophet Musa and Harun. إن الله اصطفى آدم ونوح. These are the chosen ones. وآل إبراهيم وآل عمران على العالمين. So the same thing applies to the progeny of the Prophet. And most importantly, and maybe we need a separate episode just to speak about this, is the part about Imam Ali alayhi salam. Because he says, وَأَنفُسَنَا وَأَنفُسَكُمْ. There's a consensus amongst all Muslims that the verse is referring to Imam Ali alayhi salam, because he came out with his daughter. This is a reference to nisa'ana. His children, Imam al-Hasan, Imam al-Hussein. What role did Imam Ali play? وَأَنفُسَنَا وَأَنفُسَكُمْ. This is why we find that the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, they cited their verse when they debated non-Shi'as. Imam Muslim Ja'far, when Harun said to him that, how can you prove that you're from the descendants of Rasulullah while you're the children of his daughter? And based on the culture back then, the children of the daughter belonged to the father. So Imam Muslim Ja'far, he cited this verse. And Imam Rida alayhi salam, when he was asked by Al-Ma'mun al-Abbasi, what is the single most important virtue of Imam Ali in the Quran? He cited this verse. He said, وَأَنفُسَنَا, which means that all the qualifications, all the credentials, all the virtues of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam were possessed by Imam Ali as well. This means that on the Day of Judgment, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks you, why do you believe that Imam Ali is the true successor of the Prophet? And everyone that claimed to be the successor of the Prophet after the Prophet are crooks, you can cite this verse. وَأَنفُسَنَا وَأَنفُسَكُمْ. What more do you want? Yes. And this is why this goes hand in hand with other verses. إِنَّمَا وَلِيكُمُ اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. The same authority. The same authority can only be given to someone that has the same qualifications and qualities as the Prophet himself. And this verse identifies who that person is.
Ahsan Sayyid. So what you've just explained, and you've really broken down the whole event really well. But we also hear this day referred to as Eid. So can we classify this as Eid? And when we say Eid, is this more Eid in the general sense? You know, we had Eid al-Adha recently, we had Eid al-Ghadir, and now this Eid all within 2 weeks of each other. Is it more of the case of being Eid in the generic meaning, or is it something more than that?
Well, I haven't come across a hadith that says it's Eid. However, it has all the ingredients of Eid. How? First of all, it's a religious occasion, and it's a celebratory occasion. We have a hadith in which Imam Sadiq alayhi salam says that it's recommended to fast on the day of Mubahala, to show gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another hadith says that it's mustahab to pray 2 rak'at and say shukran lillah 70 times. You thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why do we celebrate, for example, Eid al-Adha? We celebrate because you fast, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us the tawfiq to fast, and He showered us with His blessings during the month of Ramadan. After that, you celebrate Eid al-Adha to show appreciation and gratitude to Allah. Why do we celebrate Eid al-Fitr? Eid al-Adha, we celebrated the people that go to Hajj. Again, they show gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because He has blessed them with going to Hajj and reaping all the rewards. This same thing applies to this verse. First of all, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as I mentioned, identifies who our leaders are, religious leaders. And He settled a major dispute, a dispute with the Christians and a dispute with non-Shi'as. And He establishes the wilayah of Amir al-Mu'mineen on this day. So He makes everything abundantly clear. This is why it's a day of celebration. And there are so many du'as, supplications. I was going through the a'mal of du'a al-Mubahala, beautiful du'as, beautiful supplications narrated by Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, another du'a reported by Imam Muslim al-Ja'fari. You could see that it's a celebratory occasion, but even if you don't call it Eid, it's not that important. But the hadith says that if you pray 2 rak'at on the day of Mubahala, for next year, because if you pray 2 raka'at and recite Surah Al-Hamd and then recite Qul Huwa Allah 10 times, Ayat al-Kursi 10 times and Surah Al-Qadr 10 times, it's as if you've performed Hajj 60,000 times. If you've been to Hajj, right? So you know how difficult it is. But because this, why is Ghadir so important? Because it perfects the religion, it completes the religion. اليوم أتممت عليكم نعمتي ورضيت لكم الإسلام دينا. Today I am pleased with your religion, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. Otherwise, without the wilayah of Amir al-Mu'mineen, it's not accepted, yani, according to the Quran. So the same thing applies to this. He settled a major dispute and he identifies the main element in our religion.
Ahsan Sayyid. And in the explanation, you mentioned that the Christians suggested to pay the jizya. Can you sort of explain what the jizya is to clear up any sort of misconceptions around it? Is it just a tax that non-Muslims are forced to pay, which clearly is not the case if they suggested it? And what's the purpose behind it?
Well, with jizya, we have to understand how the financial system in Islam works. If you're a Muslim, then you are obliged to pay zakat. And zakat is a religious duty. And you have to do it with the right intention. If you don't purify the intention, give zakat, zakat is not accepted from you. And as a Muslim, you have many obligations living in a Muslim country. But if you're a non-Muslim, if you're from the people of the book, then you're not required to pay zakat. You have all the rights to practice your faith, to practice your religion, and you have no religious obligations. We as Muslims, for example, during the time of a ma'soom, we have to attend Salat al-Jumu'ah. But as a Christian, you don't need to pray Salat al-Jumu'ah. And if there is, if the enemies wage a war against a Muslim country, then you are obliged to take part in that war. But if you're a non-Muslim, then jihad is not wajib upon you, because again, jihad is a religious concept. You have no religious obligations whatsoever. And you have all the rights of a Muslim. If you're living if you're from the people of the book, whether you're a Christian or a Jew, you have all the rights that a Muslim has, but no religious obligations. For example, the justice system does not discriminate between a non-Muslim and a Muslim. We have examples where a Christian man who used to live in Kufa during the time of Amir al-Mu'mineen, he once came and he took the shield of Amir al-Mu'mineen. So the Imam came and he said, this is my shield. He said, but you're claiming this is your shield. According to Islam, if you possess something, then it's yours unless proven otherwise. So they go to the judge, Shuraih al-Qadi, who was appointed by Imam Ali. Imam Ali is the emperor, he was appointed by Imam Ali himself. So the Imam says that this is my shield. Shuraih says, do you have a proof? Do you have witnesses? The Imam said, no. He said, then I can't. This is his right and he gets to keep it. This is when he said, Ashhadu, the Christian man, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. He became a Muslim. And also, they have a right in the welfare system includes Christians as well. We have a hadith that one day Amir al-Mu'mineen was passing by and he saw this Christian man sitting on the side of the road. So he says, what is this? They said, Amir al-Mu'mineen is a Christian, thinking that they don't have any rights. The Imam said, so what? When he was young, you employed him until he grew old. Now that he's old, you dumped him on the side of the road. And then he ordered a share, a monthly allowance to be given to this Christian man. So they have the same rights, but they have a financial obligation because of all these perks, and also they are protected. And if there is a war, it's the responsibility of the Muslims to defend them. This is why they have a financial obligation towards
it's a pretty good deal
government.
If you think about it.
Yeah, ahsant. And with respect to, someone was saying that you have more rights if you're a non-Muslim than a Muslim. But again, because this is an obligation, yes, you can't evade paying your share and your fulfilling your obligations towards the Muslim government. And we see this everywhere. Like if you live in this country, if you're a citizen, you don't pay taxes, you risk going to prison. If you're a non-citizen and you don't pay your taxes, they can't revoke your visa and they kick you out because you have it's a two-sided road. I mean, you have your obligations and you have to pay back. So this is what Islam imposes as well. But in the story of Mubahala, they have to reach an agreement between. So it's not a set amount of money that they have to pay. Imam Ali alayhi salam went and spoke to them, and they entered the treaty and signed an agreement as to how much they would bring to the Muslim country every year. And the next year they came and they met the Prophet. It was months before the Prophet's departure, and they paid their tax. Even though they say that these people involved in the story, they became Muslims eventually. But the Christians in Najran, they were there for a good 2 centuries after Muslims, abiding by the treaty. But eventually they became Muslims because there was no war waged against them or anything. But there is no Christians today in that area.
Ahsan Sayyid, it's interesting. One of the questions we had in our online pages was who became Muslim after the event, and did any of the Christians become Muslim? So none of the Muslims that were actually present at Mubahala became, none of the Christians that were present at Mubahala became Muslims, is that correct?
No, they went back apparently, and then they became Muslim.
Okay.
So they say that Al-Aqib, Al-Sayyid and Abd al-Masih, these were the 3 main individuals. They became Muslim apparently.
Ahsan Sayyid. So the Mubahala itself is invoking, I guess people say, God's curse or the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If we look at the verse, فَمَنْ حَاجَكَ فِيهِ مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا جَاءَكَ مِنَ الْعِلْمِ فَقُلْ تَعَالَوْا نَدْعُوا أَبْنَاءَنَا وَأَبْنَاءَكُمْ وَنِسَاءَنَا وَنِسَاءَكُمْ وَأَنفُسَنَا وَأَنفُسَكُمْ ثُمَّ نَبْتَهِلْ فَنَجْعَلْ لَعْنَةَ اللَّهِ عَلَى الْكَاذِبِينَ. And this is generally translated, if you look at the English, as invoke Allah's curse upon the liars. So what do we mean here by la'an? Is this something that would have befallen the Nazarenes immediately? Or is this something that would have affected their people later on?
Okay, so the word mubahala comes from the word bahala, which means la'an. That's one of the meanings of bahala or mubahala. And mubahala means a 2-sided la'an, and each invoking the curse of God or the wrath of God on the other. It comes from the word mufa'ala. Mubahala, mufa'ala. So you do your la'an, I do my la'an, to see who is truthful and who is not. The la'an in general means, in principle, means to ask God to deprive someone from God's mercy. And we shouldn't take la'an lightly. The hadith says that if you curse someone, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not, the la'an will not target that person. As opposed to slandering. You slander someone, you insult that person. But la'an is different. The hadith says that it will hover over the head of that person that initiated the la'an, and it will see who is more worthy of the la'an, who is more deserving of the la'an. If the initiator of the la'an is more worthy, then the la'an would come on his head. So this is what the meaning of mubahala is. But when the Prophet is making the mubahala, he's asking God to deprive them from God's mercy. And we are alive today because of God's mercy. وَلَوْلَا فَضْلُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكُمْ وَرَحْمَتُهُ لَكُنْتُمْ مِنَ الْخَاسِرِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is postponing His punishment. He's given us time to do good deeds in this world. Otherwise, if He was to take away this opportunity and treat us as we deserve, then the punishment would descend over our heads. So what the Prophet is doing, he is asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to remove His rahmah and to take away His opportunity from these people. And this meant that they will receive God's wrath. The Christians, they said that if he does the la'na, and they could see the signs, they could see clouds being gathered in the sky, and they could see signs of adab. But one of them said that if he does the la'na, when he saw the Prophet falling to his knees, he said that this is how prophets do mubahala. And then he said that if he does the la'na, in 1 year, that's what the Christian side said, in 1 year we would see all the Christians perish from this region. And the Prophet himself said that by God, if we went ahead with the mubahala, God would have turned them into pigs and monkeys.
Wow.
Yeah. So most probably the la'na would have descended down straight away on them. It's the Prophet. Each Prophet has an answered prayer. And if he had asked God to punish them, he would have punished them straight away.
Ahsan, Sayyid. And just before we go on with more questions, I'd just like to let our viewers know about our Muharram program. So it'll be online completely, keeping in line with the government's protocols. And it'll be starting this upcoming Monday, the 9th of August, at 7 p.m. for 13 nights. We'll be starting with Ziyarat Ashura, followed by the English program with Sheikh Ali Mehdi, followed by the Arabic Majlis with Sayyid Jafar al-Khazwini, and finally the Latam with Mullah Karral al-Kufi. So please join us. Sayyid, we have a question from one of our online viewers. Brother Hussein is asking, were there any other famous mubahalas in Islamic history, example during the time of our Imams?
So a man comes to Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, and he says to him that, he said that I debate non-Shi'as, and he cites verses that were revealed onto the Prophet about Imam Ali alayhi salam, like إنما يريد الله ليذهب عنكم إنما وليكم الله ورسوله والذين آمنوا أطيعوا الله وأطيعوا الرسول والأمر منكم. He said, whatever I say, they come with a response and say that this is not about Imam Ali alayhi salam. Can I do mubahala? The Imam said yes, but there are conditions. You have to do ghusl, and then you have to fast for 3 days, cleansing yourself. Then do mubahala. Another hadith says, bahiluhum bi-Ali ibn Abi Talib. Why? Because you have to be super confident. Yani the mubahala, the contentious point needs to be something that you should be a real believer. So there is no doubt that Amir al-Mu'mineen was the successor of Rasulullah. Bahiluhum bi-Ali ibn Abi Talib. As for mubahala between the Imams and their opponents, the only incident that I can recall now is, it wasn't a mubahala, but it was a man goes and he daubs on Imam al-Sadiq's confidant, a man by the name of Al-Mu'alla ibn Khunais. He was a servant in the house of the Imam, but he was also his chief of staff, so to speak. So he daubs on him, and the Khalifa, he chops his head, he kills him. So the Imam then, he goes to the Khalifa, he said, why did you do this to my confidant? He said, because of this guy, and this guy comes out. He used to come to the house of the Imam, and he was, he gave away, divulged the names of the Imam's companions to the Khalifa, and he said that this guy was very close to Imam Sadiq. So he had made false claims as well. So the Imam said to him, you're making these claims, you're making these things up. I want you to do a qasam that I said these things. So he said, Wallah al-Ali al-Azim, you said these things. He said, no, you're praising God here, and God's too merciful. When you're praising Him, He's not going to punish you. Say, أخرج من حول الله وقوته. Basically what he was saying, that if I am a liar, descend your adhab on me. The hadith said, the moment he said these words, he turned into rotten meat. So this was perhaps, it wasn't a formal mubahala, but it was something similar.
Ahsan, Sayyid. So we've got about 3 questions left in about 10 minutes, so we'll try to get through all 3 of them, inshallah. The first one I wanted to ask is, what lessons can we take regarding interfaith discussions from this actual event, from the Prophet's interactions with the Nazarenes? We can see, for example, his exemplary character. Even the letter that he sent out that you mentioned earlier, it wasn't, the one of a king asking them to fall into line. It was the one of a prophet. He allowed them to enter into his masjid, which on its own is a pretty big feat. He let them worship in the masjid as well. Afterwards, when the mubahala was about to take place, he actually stopped it. He could have just kept going with it, even though they had already agreed, but they pleaded with him to stop. Then he came to terms with them and agreed onto the agreement. But we also see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did ask the Prophet to invoke the mubahala. So where do we strike that balance for us as an example with our interfaith discussions?
Well, first of all, as you mentioned, the Prophet engaged in a civil debate, conversation, discourse with them. When we see the debates today between the different faiths, it's all mockery, it's all demeaning, it's all... The Prophet could have imposed his terms and his rule on these people. Again, he was the dominating force, but he gave them all these privileges, so to speak. In his discussion, in his debate with them, we find that he focused on the main points, on Tawheed, on the status of Isa in Islam. And what he was saying was very logical. He said, my brother Isa, لا نفرق بين أحد منهم. All the prophets are equal in the sense that they are sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm not saying that I am a God, but Isa is not God. I'm not in a competition with Isa in any way. Even though the Prophet had fans and had adherents to his faith that would listen to everything that he says. They would do whatever he tells them to do. But he was reasonable. And also we find that in general, when there is a religious minority ruled over by a religious majority, we find that the minorities are usually persecuted. We see that in the East and in the West. Buddhists are supposed to be the most peaceful faith group, right? And look at what they're doing to Muslims in Myanmar. The Shias this is a classic example. The Shias in Myanmar are a minority within the Muslims. They are persecuted by the non-Shias, and the Muslims in general persecuted by the Buddhists. We find that in France, another example of how Muslims are being treated. Their policy is my way or the highway. But at the same time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent this Prophet, and he sent him إِلَى النَّاسِ كَافَّةً, to all of humanity. And he has a message to them. This is why he invited them to embrace Islam. And the most sensitive issue in this whole story was ascribing partner to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because this defeats the purpose. If you accept an authority other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with God, this means that you are rejecting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is something governments today don't accept. If you say to the Australian government, for example, that you are a source of legislation for me, and Sharia law is also a source of legislation. I can pay you tax, and I can pay a charity in Qatar or Saudi Arabia. Would they accept that from you? They say that we are the only source of legislation, and you just have to accept us. This is why he carried this message to you, and he was keen on them accepting it. At the same time, with the Mubahala, he wanted to prove that he is truthful. Yani Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knew that they will not go ahead with the Mubahala, they'll back away. But this dealt a huge blow to the Christians. They themselves withdrew from the Mubahala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a policy. His policy is وَلِلَّهِ الْحُجَّةُ الْبَالِغَةُ. Things have to be abundantly clear. When they were not convinced that the Prophet is truthful and that Isa is not a God, he had to prove it in a different way. Let me very briefly tell you the story. Ayatollah Mujtahidi al-Sistani, the younger brother of Ayatollah Sistani, passed away, rahmatullah alayh. He said one day, a man who was a Muslim, but he wasn't really a believer in everything that Islam has to say, he came up to me and he said to me that, I don't really believe in what you guys say. So he said, I debated him for hours, but eventually I couldn't convince him. Then I said to him that, let me ask you something. Let me ask you to do something. Ask God. You say that you don't believe in God that much. Ask God to do something that usually doesn't happen. Not something impossible, that usually doesn't take place. And see if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants you your wish. If He did, then you should join me and believe in what I'm telling you. If He didn't, I will join you in what you are telling me. So he said, the guy went, and with sunrise, or after Fajr, he comes to Sayyid Mujtahidi Sistani's house, knocks the door, and he's crying and he says, Sayyid, I believe in everything that you told me. He said, why? What happened? He said, I didn't sleep last night. I was sitting there, I was thinking about something unusual to ask God. And then I asked God, he used to work for the telecommunication company, I think it was during Shah's time. So I said they had sacked him from his job. I said to myself that if I receive a call from the telecommunication company reinstating me in my position now in the middle of the night, I will believe that you exist, and I will believe everything that the Sayyid told me. So he said, all of a sudden, 2 a.m., the phone rings. I pick the phone. The guy says to me that I'm calling you from the telecommunication company. I was going through the names of the individuals that we sacked. You were sacked unjustly. So I thought to myself, I'm working late overtime after hours. So I thought to myself, I'll give you a call. If you picked up the phone, I'll tell you that we're more than happy to reinstate you in your position. If you didn't pick up, then we'll let it go. So he said that this is what I asked God, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fulfilled that wish for me. One of his students tells him that, was this a karama from you? Did you ask God to show him a sign? He said, no. This is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala operates. If you're genuine, looking for the truth, and you're not convinced, Allah will show you a sign. الَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. We will make them navigate their way in life and guide them. So I said to him, think about something unusual, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will show you the sign. So Allah wanted to show them a sign. Otherwise, He knew that this is not going to happen. But they saw the sign and they themselves said that we'll withdraw. And this was a proof for the Muslims that the Prophet is truthful and that they were not confident about their own faith.
Ahsan, Sayyid. Sayyid, we've got time for just one more question. So we are on the doorsteps of Muharram and the treasury of Ashura and Sayyid al-Shuhada alayhi salam. So can you give us some recommendations for the believers to really set the mood this Muharram, particularly as we'll all be, watching the majalis at home, not being able to come to the centres, not being able to come to the masjid, and mourn together, partake in latmiyat, these type of things?
First of all, I think that this is a major setback for the Shias this year, especially for those that used to just attend during the 10 days. Throughout the year, they used to just attend these days. We've been deprived this year from physically attending the majalis. And watching these lectures online is not the same. It's different. The vibe is not there, the environment is not there. It's just different. We've been deprived from attending these majalis, and this has happened before. Not with the majalis of Imam al-Hussein. It has happened for the majalis of Imam al-Hussein in other countries. It has happened with the ziyarah of Imam al-Hussein as well. People used to go to ziyarah, and then suddenly Saddam comes in. For 30 years no one can go to ziyarah. And ziyarah is a blessing. You can go there, your prayer is answered. The majalis of Imam al-Hussein, the same. It's a huge blessing that we are deprived from this year. Imam Zayn al-Abidin says, Sayyidi, لَعَلَّكَ عَنْ بَابِكَ طَرَدْتَنِي. Is it because I'm not worthy of attending these majalis? Is it because وجدتني آلف مجالس البطالين فبيني وبينهم خليتني? Majalis of Abu Abdullah wasn't a priority for many people. Yes, if it doesn't clash with school, if I don't have to wake up early in the morning and go to work, I would come. Otherwise, it's not a priority for many people. Is it because I used to take these majalis for granted? I didn't used to appreciate these majalis. Is that why? Maybe this is one of the reasons. We should really ask ourselves, why are we deprived from these majalis? Alhamdulillah, last year at least it was a 50% capacity that we could attend. It wasn't as good as the previous years, but at least it wasn't as bad. But this year we can't even attend the majlis. So we need to compensate. We need to compensate by, now that the majalis are empty, the Husayniyat are empty, we need to turn every house into a Husayniyah. Install black cloths, change the mood, create that environment for our kids. Let the kids participate. You can play a latmiyah inside your house and get the kids to do a latmiyah. Create that environment. Let that environment, that aroma, that sorrowful atmosphere be created. And we need to, if we used to attend the majlis, now we should try to listen to more than one lecture, and do it respectfully. Don't say that it's like watching a video at home, sitting on the couch or lying down. No, do it with respect, because you're dealing with Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, and you're dealing with Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam. And we have a hadith that Imam al-Hussein, he sees his zawar. He knows them, those people that attend the majalis. Imam Zayn al-Abidin, when he was about to leave Karbala and he saw that spectacle, dismembered body of his father and his uncles, Lady Zainab said that the message of Imam al-Hussein will be carried, the standard of Imam al-Hussein will be carried. She doesn't say لَيُنصَبَنَّ فِي هَذَا الطَّفْ. In this location, a standard will be raised. She said, لِصَاحِبِ هَذَا الطَّفْ. For the person of Karbala, for Imam al-Hussein, standards will be raised in different parts of the globe. So Imam al-Hussein knows the people that attend. Fatima al-Zahra knows these people, all the people that attend, all the people that engage in the mourning of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. We need to compensate for this loss, for not being able to attend, by turning every house into Husseiniya.
Ahsan Sayyid, ma inshallah Allah bring us all together next year to be able to partake together in these majalis. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the ziyarah of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein in this world and his intercession in the hereafter. Thank you for coming onto the program, Sayyid. You've really cleared up some misconceptions around Mubahala. You've really explained the event really well, and you've given some great advice to the viewers. Just finally, for our viewers, over the next 2 weeks during the 13-night program, we won't be holding the talk show. But just a reminder once again, our program will start this Monday, the 9th of August. The program will be completely online again, keeping in line with government restrictions, so please don't turn up at the centre. We'll be starting with Ziyarat Ashura, followed by English lecture with Sheikh Ali Mehdi, followed by the Arabic Majlis with Sayyid Ja'far al-Qazwini, and finally Latim with Mullah Qarrar al-Kufi. As the Sayyid suggested, maybe you can do your own Latim at home with the Mullah. That's all for now. Fi aman Allah, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.